there is this monumental hypocrisy where people will just pay a lot of money to live away from immigrants, never see an immigrant, never interact with an immigrant, and then, for many of them, talk about how wonderful immigration is.
Pascal Emmanuel Gobry is the host of the Sphere podcast, a Paris resident and previously wrote for a number of French publications, including Atlantico, Figaro, and Valeurs actuelles. Today, he joins me to talk about why the streets of France have become dangerous for women, how politicians and social services allowed this to happen, and whether populist parties will succeed in the upcoming French presidential elections as a response. Pascal, welcome to my program. I'm going to start because we live in a world where we live in our own echo chambers and silos, and I'm sure you're famous in one of those, but I really want to understand, for my public, for my audience to understand and appreciate who you are. So could you please tell me a little bit about yourself? You are American, you're French, you live in Paris. Yeah.
Yes, I have a bit of an unusual biography. So I'm fully French, born and raised here. But through a series of mishaps, I became involved in American politics, starting with journalism, and so I wrote a lot about American politics. I was affiliated for a very long time with an American think tank called the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and now I own a media company, and one of the products of this media company focuses on American politics and policy. And I also have this podcast called the Sphere Podcast, which is broader interest.
And so typically your audience would be French or American?
Both. I mean, I'm a Twitter micro celebrity. I've committed journalism in France and in America, and even a little bit in Britain. So as a social media influencer, whatever you want to put it, I have an audience in both places.
You are definitely a celebrity to me. I found you on Twitter, what is now called X, after Elon bought it, and I found your translation of the long letter that was written by the young woman who lives in Lyon.
Yes.
And I want to start by asking you, how did you meet this woman and why did you decide to translate that letter?
So I didn't meet her, but I knew of her through a man named Damien Rieu, who's a French whistleblower, um, and also influencer. Everybody's an influencer these days, but he's a very important figure in calling attention to all the problems related to immigration and Islam in France, and he's the one who authenticated the letter and then published it. And I know and trust Damien, and so I read this letter. I thought it was first of all very moving, but also very true. It reflected what I know from my own life and what I know the statistics say. And so that's why I decided to publish it. And then Elon Elon commented on it. A lot of people commented on it. So did you. And yeah, that's how we got in touch with each other, which I'm very grateful for.
Thank you. Yeah. So the last 25 years, the reasons that were given for shrouding immigrants' problems, the unintended negative consequences of immigration, for hiding them, for shrouding them, for not collecting the numbers, for not building more prisons, for not having the police do their jobs. All of this, the reasons that were given were, we want to make the immigrants feel welcome. That was one.
Right.
And the other side of that coin was, we want to suppress racist or the native populations rejecting or discriminating against immigrants. In France, do you think that those two goals have been achieved? In other words, what do they have to show for these policy choices? Yeah.
I mean, the what yeah, I mean, your question is obviously rhetorical. We also have surveys on attitudes of young um, people of immigrant backgrounds, their views of their cultural views, their views of Sharia, their views of women's rights, their views of French values as opposed to Muslim values, their views of whether it's appropriate to kill a woman for adultery, and so on and so forth. Um, and what we find is that each new generation is worse than the last. In other words, assimilation is happening in reverse. The experiment is simply not working. The people who come here are not. I mean, obviously, some of them are, and that's very good. But overall, either the majority or distressingly large numbers of people who are here of immigrant background don't integrate, don't assimilate into French culture. And if anything, exposure to French culture sort of radicalizes them into a more virulent version of Islam than they would find in their own country. Morocco is a nation that historically has a sort of more moderate version of Islam. Um, but Moroccans in France, uh, again, with all the caveats, not all of them, blah 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 blah. But the yeah, it's not working. The two communities, the various communities, alienate each other, and you can think that's very sad, or what. It's just a fact. It's just what's happening in reality.
And in terms of the inflow, the flow of immigrants coming into France, what is
Yeah.
that like? I know we don't have precise numbers because the government doesn't want to share those.
Right.
But if you were to estimate, on an annual basis, how many people come in and how many people are deported, and how many people decide to take small boats to the United Kingdom,
Right.
or decide to move on to France and from France to other
Right.
parts of Europe. Yeah.
Right. So the numbers under Macron have been unprecedented. Um, he truly is the replacist president. I believe the numbers are 200,000 per year of legal immigration. So that would be 1 million over a 5-year term. Anecdotally, they're also coming from everywhere. It used to be mainly from former French colonies in Africa, and now there are Peruvians, Indians, Bangladeshis, Afghans, lots of Afghans, for some reason, Syrians, Turks, um, and so the numbers are very high.
But how many of those actually stay in France, and how many move on?
That's a very good question. I would assume most of them stay. Very few are deported because it's very hard to. There are all sorts of laws and so on and so forth, and then the host countries refuse to take them in, and of course the government doesn't apply diplomatic pressure or financial pressure, which it could, on those governments to take them back, because in many cases, this is very much the case of Algeria and Morocco. They, I don't. I'm not trying to quote Trump, but they very much send their worst people. It's a way for them to get rid of sort of undesirables, and so they don't want them back. And so it's very hard to send anybody back. There are no, third-party country agreements the way that the UK tried to have, or the way that the US is having with El Salvador and wants to do with Rwanda. Um, so if it's either a quote unquote dangerous country, or if it's a country that doesn't want to admit migration flights, well, they just have to stay here.
That is the asylum system, yeah, which I
Yeah.
believe that the Geneva Convention, the 1951 Geneva Convention, has turned into this monster,
Yes.
again, unwittingly. And it seems as if none of these governments actually want to withdraw from these treaties, but I think circumstances will force their hand.
Let's
Quoting,
hope so.
yeah, so referencing President Trump, he campaigned like many European politicians that if he gets elected, he's going to deport illegal immigrants. And he's actually done it, and he's doing it. And he
Yes.
has closed the borders. We now see like
Yes.
99% of the border is closed, or the numbers of people coming in has gone down by 99%
Yes.
in just 100 days.
Which demonstrates that they respond to incentives.
But that's also policy wise. It's a
Yeah.
policy priority. These are all
Yeah.
policy choices.
Yes.
And the prevailing center left or center right governments are making in Europe, making these choices. And it's not a priority for them. They make these promises, but they don't make them true. And that
Yes.
takes me to the question of values, which is to get back to the woman who wrote that letter. She's
Yes.
being told by her government that she doesn't matter.
Yes. Or worse, that she doesn't matter, that um she's unwanted. I mean, it's the mystery of the contemporary West. It's the people who run the countries hate and despise the people of their own countries who are not part of the elite. And why that is a fascinating question. But it's a fact. They have contempt for people of their own countries who didn't go to the right schools, who don't live in the right places, who don't have the right degrees, who don't have the right kind of jobs, and so on and so forth. And they think they're less than. It's very true in the UK, where the class thing is extremely powerful. It's true in France. It's true in the U.S. Obviously, the American liberal elites just absolutely hate with virulent passion the people who live inside the country. Um,
I have
and
that is
and
my takeaway.
it's a great mystery, but that's the solution, and that's why I it's hard to not see it as a deliberate policy choice in the manifestation of hate, and the fact that these criminals are seen consciously or unconsciously by the people who rule us as an instrument. They think it's good when when a African immigrant stabs a poor white person. They think it's good. They think that that's what they deserve for being a racist hillbilly, who didn't who can't write good or whatever. For some of them, it might not be conscious, but that's what explains their course of action.
I have spoken to so many people across so many different countries, many of them working class, middle class, or Christian, for instance, and they all say the same thing. They say the people we've elected, the people who govern us, hate us. And when I
Hmm.
say, how do you know that? You sound like a conspiracy theorist. They say, but look at this. I mean, for instance, the grooming gangs, so called grooming gangs, these were
Yes.
organized rape gangs in Britain, and they were known for many, many years. And you look at how these stories are developing with the political party that's supposed to represent the working
Right.
classes
Right.
refusing point blank to have an inquiry. So it is a common, you hear it in Canada, you hear it in Australia, you hear it everywhere. It is, they
Yes.
are seen as a basket of deplorables.
Yes.
But because of the sheer scale of the immigration, you're now seeing that it's not limited to just working class neighborhoods or working
Yes.
classes. It's spread to the middle classes. I want to talk to you about the Jewish minorities of Europe, and especially those in France. There was another horrific story about
Yes.
that young 12-year-old Jewish girl who was raped and tortured by 13-year-olds,
Yeah.
12, 13-year-olds, her age
Yeah.
mates, basically. Um, and then the government, the president of France, comes out and says, "Oh, I condemn this," just the same script over and over again. This has no
Yes, of
place
course.
in France. But then, after incidents, horrific incidents like that, what changes on the ground?
Nothing. Nothing. It's absolutely it's absolutely despairing. France is, historically has been the most philo-Semitic country in Europe. It was the first country in Europe to grant Jews civic equality. It has had and has the biggest Jewish population in Europe. Um, well, since World War II, the biggest Jewish before World War II, the biggest Jewish population was in Poland, but and even then, it had one of the biggest um, Jewish populations in Europe. And my great grandfather was in the French Resistance. The idea that once again it's unsafe to be a Jew in France is a source of deep shame and anger for me, as a patriotic Frenchman. And and yes, it's in this case that you can see the hypocrisy, sort of in complete full flower, because of course our leaders will never condemn anti-white racism, but they will condemn anti-Semitism, and it's good that they condemn anti-Semitism. They should also condemn anti-white racism, but it's good that they condemn anti-Semitism. And so when there is an anti-Semitic atrocity, they will go on the TV and say, "Oh, never again. Oh, the values of the republic," and da, 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 da." But they know very well that they're not going to do anything, um, and that they're not going to change anything. And so it's it's horrifying. It's the Jewish community in France is bleeding away. They're slowly leaving for either Israel or the United States, and I certainly can't blame them. But it weakens us. It weakens us as a nation because historically they're a group that's disproportionately educated, disproportionately contribute positively to culture, to the economy, and so on and so forth. Like if you know, putting aside morality, it's also not in the national interest for this to happen. So it's just awful, and I don't know what else to say.
So you're taking the most productive,
Yeah.
most law abiding population, and they're basically being hounded out of the country, and you're bringing in huge flaws
Yes.
of
Yes.
people who will
And
only
yes.
depend on the system and will will represent and boost the prison population, the crime
Yes.
population,
Yes.
the social unrest. That's the exchange of peoples
Yes.
that you're having, and all of this sounds insane and unreal. But again, it's not France alone. It's all of these European countries
Yes.
in 2025. I'm going to ask you about the relationship between the Jewish communities and Marine Le Pen. I hope I'm pronouncing her name
Yes.
right, and
Yeah.
Front National. And what is the story with her? Has she actually committed the offenses that she is charged with, or are these all cooked up to make sure that she doesn't run for elections against Macron?
So okay, so there's a lot there. So I assume you're referring to the current lawsuit, and it's complete lawfare. It's the
I think
facts. Nobody denies.
it would help my audiences if you
Yes.
explain to us what this current lawsuit
Right.
is, and it's
Right.
yeah.
Right. So there is a number of lawsuits against many different parties that had European parliamentary offices related to how they spent the funds that are allocated to pay for parliamentary assistance. And the contention is that these funds can only be used to pay for people doing European parliamentary work and not other political work. Um, and so you have numerous parties that are alleged to not have obeyed those rules, including Marine Le Pen's National Rally. This was 10, 15 years ago, the facts. And so she was recently sentenced by a court of first instance to a fine, to a suspended prison sentence. No, not a suspended prison sentence, a prison
An
sentence
actual prison sentence.
with electronic bracelets, so house arrest. Um, and what's known as ineligibility, which is she cannot run for public office. She's legally barred from running for public office. Nobody else who was implicated in this parliamentary financial thing received a sentence of ineligibility. And there is another legal wrinkle, which is, so it was a first instance court. So you have the first instance and then the appeals. Under French law, when you appeal a sentence, the sentence is suspended unless there is a threat to public order, meaning the person being sentenced is violent, basically. And so, we're not dealing with a violent crime. And Marine Le Pen is not, stealing old ladies' handbags in the subway. Uh,
We're dealing with a political inconvenience.
right. And so the judge declared that there was a threat to quote unquote democratic public order, which is a notion that does not exist in French law and has never existed, and that therefore the sentence should apply immediately and not be suspended by the appeal, which is a complete. I mean, it's a legal fabrication, and there were a few sort of neutral legal experts who said so. So yes, it's the same kind of lawfare that we've seen in Romania, that we've seen against Trump in the United States. It's purely politically motivated. It's, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. Of course, nobody is completely innocent. Um, but the sentence is disproportionate. Oh, I should mention. So I said a bunch of parties and personalities were implicated in this parliamentary financial scheme. That includes the current prime minister, except that he wasn't sentenced to anything. He got a very small fine.
Yeah, yeah. So what it tells me is, for years and years, Marine Le Pen and parties like hers. Again, in Germany, you have the AfD. I lived in the Netherlands, and I knew Geert
Yeah.
Wilders very well. Swedish Democrats, the Reform Party in Britain, all of these populist parties that are running mainly on immigration and on issues of Islam and the negative consequences of that, that for many years their leaders were smeared as far right and racist.
Yes.
And that doesn't seem to work anymore. I mean, it would have worked, I think, if the establishment parties had actually addressed those problems, but they never addressed those problems. The immigration
Exactly.
numbers go up, the crime numbers go up, women are unsafe on the streets, and we have
Yes.
all of these problems. And so we're now shifting from these soft smears, your racist far right, to actual abuse of the law and
Yeah.
uh, you know charging and convicting political rivals for fear that they may actually win the election. That's where we are. It looks
Yeah.
like Germany is also going to outlaw or has thought of outlawing
Yes.
the AfD as a party altogether.
Yeah.
Where is
It's
this?
it,
Where is this going to take us?
I don't know. I don't know, but you described the situation perfectly. It's a regime that is trying to defend itself. And to your question, I hope that we end with a peaceful outcome. I hope that we end with a peaceful democratic transition to a new settlement, a new, not just new policies, but a new form, a new political outlook where, everybody or the majority agrees that the purpose of policy of the government is to help the people of the country, not a small elite and not foreigners. Certainly not foreigners at the expense of the population. Once the country does very well, if we can help other countries and foreigners, maybe why not? But once the country is doing well, we're not going to rob poor people or unemployed people or downtrodden people here to help immigrants, foreigners, foreign financial interests, and so on and so forth. That seems like a very, very basic, so basic that it goes without saying, but that is the fundamental difference between a party like the National Rally and the rest of the political system in France, between a movement like MAGA in the US and the rest of the political system in the US, a party like the AfD in Germany and the rest of the political system in Germany, and so on and so forth. Um, I hope we can get there through peaceful and democratic means. I know that if we don't, then, and this is not a threat, this is not, I'm not calling for civil war or anything, but I don't the current regime cannot go on.
It's
So
an
it needs
analysis.
to be replaced by something.
It's a rational analysis of these developments and these tensions. Is that as
Yes.
the tensions build up and build up, there is either the democratic outlet, you let these
Yes.
candidates and these parties run and win and take charge, or you run into something else. In November 2024 in America, for us, it's a majority of the population that made that call.
Yes.
Uh, we feared that the election might be too close. It wasn't. It was a
Yes.
clear outcome. And so for us, that tension, that build up of tension, was released through the ballot box.
Yes.
I don't think we're out of hot water. There's 2028 to come and so on. But the lawfare and the smears against
Yes.
Donald Trump did not work. And the population sent the message, we don't want our system to be abused in this way. And looking at the European electoral systems, it's very, perhaps with the exception of Britain, almost all the other countries have either proportional representation systems or some other complex hybrid system where it's very difficult to have clear cut
Right.
outcomes. You have to work with coalitions, and you know
Right.
in these coalitions, these small parties that now I'm thinking about the Netherlands, for instance. Geert
Right.
Wilders won the election fair and square, but he does have to form a coalition, and any of the other members could bring the government down.
Yes. Yes. And I mean, the political system is one thing, but the problem is this theory of the cordon sanitaire. So if you look at Germany, for example, you could numerically you could have a CDU AfD coalition, and they would have a majority, and the the AFD, I think, would be happy to be the minority partner in a CDU government if they got what they wanted on immigration. And the CDU voters want a change in immigration. They're not pro-immigration, um, and so they could very well have a sort of sane center-right government uh, that is strong on immigration because it has a minority member that cares very deeply about this issue. It's Austria did this in the late 90s. I remember it was the end of the world. It was the first European country where a populist party joined a government, the FPÖ, and I mean, as far as I know, Austria's
It's still there.
is still there. Still a democracy, nobody starved to death. No concentration
No
camps.
concentration camps. That's what they were
It's in
saying.
fact one of the loveliest and prettiest countries in the world. Um, there's no reason not to do this. If you think the populist right or whatever is too extreme, or they don't have the right skills to run a government, which is legitimate concerns. Okay, fine, bring them in a coalition, or just co-opt their issue.
Well,
Just
elections have
stop
consequences.
immigration, and force the current anti-crime laws, and I guarantee you reform will disappear, AFD will disappear, National Rally will disappear, but they refuse to do that, and it is there's a mystery there.
Well, there is the mystery is that the interests of the people who govern the establishment, parties, politicians, I suppose media, and even academic
Yeah,
classes simply does not align with that of huge
yeah,
majorities of the population. That's a mystery. Some of this, there are two things I want to talk to you about that, again, in terms of addressing these tensions. And one has to do with what some of the middle class or wealthier groups have been doing to protect themselves from the crime, whether it's
right.
sexual crime or different kinds of crime, where they don't rely on the police, but they rely on private securities that they hire. And this phenomenon of private security, it just reminds me of Africa, Latin
Yeah,
America,
yeah,
where you literally have a two-tier
yeah,
justice system, a two-tier everything.
yeah,
And so, if you listen to the political elites of Western European countries, they keep harping on equality, equality, equality. But there is no equality in healthcare, no equality in the provision of security, no equality in anything. Because if you can afford it, you simply build a
absolutely.
wall around your house and you hire people to protect you.
Yeah,
But large segments of the population cannot do that. And again, I'm not saying, or maybe I am actually, that if we carry on this path, then there's going to be the public revolt, which becomes inevitable.
yeah,
But that public revolt usually starts with people refusing to pay taxes. Why should I pay taxes? I'm paying taxes for these services, and if I'm not getting them, why should I pay these taxes? That's one. The other is, especially when it comes to the protection of life and limb, women and children, that
right.
men organize themselves and say, okay, you come anywhere near my family and you are toast. You see,
Yeah,
this threat is always, I think, better articulated in America than it is in European countries. But I think when I responded to your tweet after you had posted that long letter from this young woman, my first question was, so where are the men of France?
right. Well, they're getting stabbed. Um, and this is not an excuse, but it's complicated. Uh, the risk of confronting these criminals is that you get stabbed. Um, and I mean, I do it. I always do it, but I've gotten into. I'm not trying to brag, but I've gotten into a couple fights, and I was threatened one time with a knife when men harass women on the metro.
Sorry, sorry. Were you um, were you threatened when you were protecting women that regular passengers, or was it your family members?
No, it was regular passengers. It was once it was a young woman, and once it was an old woman.
Have you got any family members who've been affected this way?
I mean, I can tell a story. My oldest daughter is 13, and she just told me this story like yesterday when she came home from school, or the day before. She was taking the metro home from school, and she bumped into a man, and he started shouting at her, quote, in some incomprehensible language, end quote. And then he shoved her violently. And I mean, that's obviously, you know, that's not the end of the world, but that's something that doesn't happen in a homogenous high trust society, because in Western countries, people don't shove, little girls for bumping into them. And then they don't shout at them. They don't shout at little girls in public. Um, And so, I mean, I could tell you so many stories. I've had my phone stolen once. I had somebody try to steal my phone another time. I have a very good friend of mine who was severely beaten up and ended up in hospital, because he took the RER, that's the suburban train, too late one night. Um, and on and on. I have a friend. You were asking where the men are. I have a friend who defended a young woman from a group and was severely beaten. He spent months in hospital. He wrote a book about it. Um, um, he's a journalist. So this is life. And to the point, to the suggestion of men organizing in some way to create safe spaces. I mean, I would love to see that, and I would want to participate, but the problem is we live in a regime of anarcho tyranny, right? Those men got organized, they would immediately get arrested. They would immediately get thrown into prison. The drug cartels are not being threatened, but if you had, native French self-defense leagues, of course they would immediately get arrested. They would be called racist, fascist, stormtroopers, and so on and so forth. Um, so so I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I mean, it would be good for people to organize in very legal ways to sort of create networks and sort of um, teach self defense skills and other similar skills, perhaps to prepare for the future. But they should expect very close government attention. And in terms of the society being separated, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, that's the future that we're being prepared for. It's a global Brazil, a global South Africa, a sort of giant favela where, the rich and the elite sort of live in compounds with high walls and private security. I mean, in France, as in the US, as probably in Britain, I would assume, the entire housing market is, and again, this is something everybody knows and nobody says, the entire housing market is organized around avoiding immigrants. And so, people pay lots and lots and lots of money to live in a place where there are no immigrants, myself included. Um, and to send their children to school in places where there are no immigrants. And the way you, quote unquote, discriminate, and by the way, in English, the word discriminate is not pejorative. It just means to differentiate. But the way you discriminate is through price, because you cannot discriminate through race, you cannot discriminate through religion, you cannot discriminate through background, which may or may not be a good thing. But there is this monumental hypocrisy where people will just pay a lot of money to live away from immigrants, never see an immigrant, never interact with an immigrant, and then, for many of them, talk about how wonderful immigration is.
So that's why I said, but yet your daughter was attacked. So even if you pay these huge amounts of money to live in some gated community away from the consequences of immigration, just given the sheer scale of it, there's no avoiding it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just what you
All you
described.
can do is lower your odds. But yeah.
Yes, lowering the odds. Yeah. um, it's just really sad. What is your prediction of the next presidential election in France? What do you think is going to be the outcome? What do you think is going to be the follow on from whatever that outcome is?
I mean, I hope that whoever the RN candidate, whether Marine or Bardella, wins. It's a possibility. The polls are very close, and in many cases, the RN candidate is ahead. And I hope, and I'm speaking here personally for myself. I hope that they understand that, and I hope this lawsuit helped. I hope they understand that if and when they get in power, they must engage in true regime change. They must find legal and peaceful ways of removing the vast majority of judges. The judiciary in France is extremely corrupt. They must remove the civil service. They must seriously reform media and academia. And there's no independent media in France because they're subsidized by the government. They're owned by oligarchs who are close to the government, with very few exceptions. So they're not independent. So they're an extension of the regime. So it would be totally legitimate to reform these institutions. Um, and we need to stop the flow of migration from underdeveloped countries, and we need to send back as many as possible. We're not going to be able to send them all of them back, and we probably shouldn't, because we don't want to,
Yeah, the citizens.
right, we don't want, well, not all of them are citizens, and a lot of them who are citizens have dual citizenship. Because of course France is a proposition nation, but Morocco, Algeria, and so on are ethnic nations. And so if you're Moroccan origin, you're entitled to Moroccan citizenship. Um, and there are provisions in law to strip citizenship from people who have engaged in criminal activity, and so on and so forth. Um, so
Are there any conversations in France, political conversations about withdrawing from the Geneva Convention, 1951 Geneva Convention on Asylum and Refugees, or the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights?
Well, so there isn't really, I mean, I don't know. But you don't even have to withdraw. You can just make them not applicable in internal law. In other words, uh, a treaty obliges a government, right? Government signs a treaty. It means it has an obligation to do X, Y, and Z. That's not the same thing as saying any judge in the country can use the treaty and apply it internally. And so all of these conventions are being applied in extremely expensive ways. And so the French government, or any government, can simply say, I will be the judge of how I am applying this convention or treaty. Um, but lower level judges must only apply French law. They cannot apply a foreign treaty.
Well, if people show up by the thousands and they apply for asylum, and you have these, you're beholden to these treaties that say, A, you can't return them. And even when they commit crimes, it's if they face, I've seen so many of these cases where you can't return, rapists who have taken part in a gang rape and killed their victims or nearly killed their victims. You can't send them back to Afghanistan because there's a danger there. And
Yeah, I mean, I'm in. If it's necessary to withdraw from the treaty, I support that. I'm just saying you don't even have to do that. You can just decide that you're going to interpret the treaty in a certain way, and then your judges are bound by that interpretation.
yeah, I mean, it is. I think before we even get into the legal nitty gritty, there has to
Yeah,
be the political will.
yeah.
And the political will is not there with the establishment. So that's a terrible conclusion to reach, which means, yeah, it is. We'll see where how far the populist parties get, and then how this unfolds. But I really hope for the best. I was. Um,
There's hope for France. There is hope. The anti-establishment forces are very strong. The as I said, the people who work in the police and many of them who work in the government are very good. It's just this layer of people at the top who are not just corrupt, although they are, but sort of hateful towards their own country. And they need to be removed, and it's going to be very difficult, but it's not at all impossible.
Pascal, thank you very much for joining us. It was a huge pleasure to speak to you. Please come again.
Thank you. It was a great honor and a great pleasure.